Hey, what's going on, everyone? My name is Jonathan, and today I'm going to show you how to bake using 3ds Max and Substance Painter. I've been using Substance Painter quite a bit over the past couple years, and I'm no master at it by any means, but I've got the workflow down pretty good, and I figured I would create a tutorial on it. And not that there's not enough tutorials out there, but I figured I like teaching, and um, why not get some more free information out there? So yeah, back to Substance Painter. It's a great program. I bake using other stuff like XNormal and different things, and I think Substance Painter has one of the best workflows. It's very straightforward. It's very clean, and I've always gotten great results. So I'm going to go through how to prepare your meshes in Max, and then we'll jump into Substance Painter and go through the baking process there. So I'm going to try and make this as fast and as straightforward as possible. I might cover some things in Substance Painter a little bit, but mainly just focusing on the baking process and just getting good results, which is what we're all looking for, right? So the first thing we want to do in Max is start out with our naming conventions. So what Substance Painter relies upon is suffixes. So we need to make sure our naming conventions are consistent with our low poly and high poly meshes, and then we got to get our suffixes right. So our high poly and low poly suffix, and you'll see that when we jump into Substance Painter. So to start with Max right now, I just have things kind of in a blah mode here for tutorial sake. So we'll just start naming, and I guess a rule of thumb first is what I like to do is I like to check and make sure my meshes are ready to go. So there's a couple things I like to do. I like to work with edible polys, as opposed to meshes. It's just I don't know, habit, I suppose, but just poly's kind of cleaner in my opinion. And yeah, real quick before I go forward, this is using 3ds Max, but honestly the concepts are the same. So if you're in Maya or Blender, I mean it's all the same workflow. It's just you can't follow button clicks if that's what you're gonna do to get your results. So if you're just trying to understand theory and concept, they go right with your 3D package. So it's really the focus again is end result on Substance Painter. So all right, we'll start with like I said, getting the meshes right. So this is something I always like to do anyway, whenever I'm ready to prep a model here. So one thing I like to do is first check out and make sure my normals are correct. So one thing I do in 3ds Max is I go to X view here from views, and we go to face orientation, and hotkey is Alt F for me anyway, and you can see everything is good to go. If it's not, you'll see an inside out with the green. So if I hit normal here, you can see that it turns green, and that's now a flip normal. That's inside out, and you're going to get issues with that. So, and you'll definitely get issues with that in Substance Painter, and as you bake, you'll have baking issues, all that jazz. So you want to make sure your normals are all where they need to be, and we're set there. So we'll turn that off, and might as well double check your unwrap. Oh, sorry. Let me Control A of that and open that up. Very basic unwrap, nothing too special, but it works for the process here, or for the project, and just get the demonstration down. All right, so, and the last thing I like to do is I like to get my pivots. Well, two things here. Pivots all kind of centered up, which they are, and I mean unless you have special pivots, but it's not a huge issue with the pivot points, but it's just something I always like to do. And then Xform. I like to run an Xform on everything. So just Xform your models, and I just kind of make sure the position and orientation is somewhat good, so you don't have like certain pieces flying off in space. It's usually not an issue, but it has happened to me in the past. So, and then I just like to flatten, collapse all that stuff down. So that's pretty much it there. Everything's looking good. Smoothing groups, I've already gone through and prepared, so that's all set. Now let's start naming things. So we'll start up here with the top one. We're going to call it screwdriver. Actually, we'll go camel case here. Screwdriver. We'll call it point. I know it's not completely accurate, but that works. And I'm not going to add the suffixes right now. I'm going to show you a quick process here at the end using rename objects. And it's just a good rule of thumb here. All right, so let's do the next one here. We're going to go screwdriver handle. We're gonna copy that right there. And then we're going to go screwdriver end. So we'll go screwdriver end, and we're all set there. So now we have our base names ready to go. And I have my high poly hidden. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just copy names here. So I'm going to copy that first name. I'm going to hide my low poly, bring up my high poly, and we're going to select that top there, and we're just going to paste that up. We're going to kind of do that for each piece here. So back to hide and unhide, and do that for this handle. And kind of tedious, but repetition is the way. That's how we learn, right? So we go through all this stuff, and we have this end piece here. And I actually want to, I got a little screw there at the end, and see, but I don't like edible mesh. I just don't like it. Some people like it. I don't like it. Give me edible poly, baby. And then we're just going to attach a little end piece there. And a final thing we're going to focus on too is materials. Setting up material IDs or / poly groups if you're speaking ZBrush. And then our final shader here, because that all has importance for this process. So let me bust that little poly up real quick again and select this end. I think I already copied it, but you never know. You never know. Alright, then let's paste this end here. And we're all set, so our name should be consistent and ready to go. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to this low poly. I'm going to select everything. I'm going to go to Tools, Rename Objects, and I don't need the base name because I already have my base names ready to go, but I'm going to add a suffix. So we're going to add a low poly suffix. We're going to hit Rename, and pretty dope, man. This just renamed everything and kept the base name because we deselected that, and it gave a suffix for everything, which is exactly what we need to do. So we're good there. We're going to go back to the high poly, and we're going to do the same exact thing. So Tools, Rename Objects, deselect base name, go to suffix, and we're going to add a high poly suffix this time. And you can name it whatever you want. I like just the underscore. You know, start with camel case, and then use your underscore at the end, and underscore, you know, caps, high poly, low poly. But you can do whatever you want. You just have to make sure it's consistent when you bake in Substance Painter, which I'll show you down the line here. So again, we'll rename that, and that's all good to go. So cool, we're good. Now what I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to go through our material IDs. So essentially, when you come down to your material IDs, you want to set up different groups based on what your textures are going to be. So right here, obviously, we have the screwdriver has a metal point, so we're going to give that a separate ID, and then the rest is all going to be a plastic handle, so that can be the same ID. I've done things with tons of them, and that can get a little crazy. You know, I've exported an FBX with maybe like, I don't know, maybe like 16 material IDs, and sometimes they can overlap, and that can be kind of problematic. But for the most part, if you're doing something simple, it's very straightforward. So, you know, this is great for the tutorial, very simple, straightforward. So what I'm going to do here is hit material. If you go down here, you know, we'll just go to material here and material ID, and we'll keep that as a 1. And then our handles here, we'll make that a 2. And there's a couple ways to do that, but this is by far the easiest. Just add a modifier and collapse it. And that works out great. So now we know our material IDs are set up. So cross that off. That's ready to go. And then another one, I'm going to do that on my high poly. I don't think it matters on the high poly, but I'm going to do it anyway. But I think it matters more on the low poly than the high. I don't think it registers for the high, but I could be wrong. So that took a whole 10 seconds, so why not do it right? It's not going to hurt. So let's go back to the low poly. And now what does matter is our material. So we want to set up our material, and I'm going to delete that fella, and we're going to drop a new material, and this is where things are definitely needing to be consistent. So what we want is we really just want one material. Now if you had, what you could do is if you had different UVs, for example, you could set up multiple materials here. So say we had our own UV for the point here, and then our own UV for the handle. We would want to use 2 different materials to do that. So that way, when we bake in Substance Painter, we'll have two different texture sets to work with, or materials. I guess you could just call it texture sheets. That'd be the correct term. So, but for this process here, we just want 1. So we're gonna select We're going to select everything. And we're going to name our material here screwdriver. And we're going to apply it. So that's pretty key. So those are kind of the last steps I can sometimes forget, is to set up my material IDs and then add the material. So definitely remember to do that. Otherwise you're going to bake and then you're going to have to rebake, and just make sure. I mean, it takes time. You might fail a little bit, but like I said, that's one positive thing of this being kind of a tedious, repetitious cycle, is that you eventually get it down pat and you don't forget these steps. So we're all good here. Our material's set. Our material IDs are set. The models are ready. The normals are good. X form's good. It's the low poly is ready to go. So now what we're going to do is we have it all selected. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go Alt E. I'm going to export this baby out. And we're going to go Substance Tutorial here. I'm going to make a quick folder just called Export. And we're going to go here and we're going to export an FBX. And we're just going to call it a screwdriver. And what's cool is this doesn't have to be consistent with anything in here. So the FBX, since I have all these multiple objects combined into one FBX, it's going to recall all these sub-object names essentially. So it's going to remember what you named these separate objects. So this name matters not at all. Talking like a caveman, sorry. It doesn't matter. So we're just going to call it screwdriver, booyah, and we're going to export that FBX out. Definitely want your smoothing group saved. You're not going to normally have a turbo smooth, so this is pretty good to go. And you could triangulate it. It's naturally going to triangulate, I believe, anyway. So it really doesn't matter, but it is a good rule of thumb actually to triangulate your model on an export. So we're going to do that. We're just going to hit triangulate. I haven't had issues when I don't use triangulate. The process will just kind of smooth itself out either way. So yeah, we're good there. We got our low poly all fixed up. Now what we want to do is we want to go to our high poly, and we're going to have to export these out individually. So we're going to copy and paste these names. We're going to export these out as OBJs. So we have high poly OBJs, and and this is where for baking purposes the names are important. So definitely make sure you're copying, pasting, and saving out the right pieces. So we got that one done. We're going to do this guy here, and we're going to export that as well. Done. And this last piece here. And I haven't I've done this screwdriver bake before, but I added a couple pieces, so I'm not exactly sure how they're going to turn out. So we'll find out together. A surprise for us both. So such as some of this text I added, and some of the stuff might look wonky. This will look like an indent. It'll bake like that. Yeah, it's sticking out. But when you bake it, it's just going to bake in. You're going to kind of see this, so it's going to look like an indent. So you don't have to actually take this text and make a Boolean into your high poly mesh and have to do that extra work. You can actually just kind of set the text outside of your model, and that should bake just fine. So we'll go through the parameters on that. But I learned that through different tutorial. Guy had that spot on. So this, I'm not sure how this will bake out. It's a little bit high. Normally I'd probably model a screw like that in if it's sticking out that far, but I just want to see how that's going to bake, and it might work out cool. So I believe we're all good there. I exported everything. I'm going to double check here. Substance tutorial, and yeah, we're good. So we have our FBX and we have our 3 high poly OBJs. So we are now essentially good to go. So we're done in Max. That's it. So we can actually close this out, and now we'll bust open Substance Painter. So Substance Painter here, we're going to start, and we're going to open up we're going to start with a new file. Yeah, PBR metal roughness is what it defaults to. It's usually what you want to roll with. If you're using opacity channels, you're going to want to do like an alpha blend. But you can adjust that stuff after anyways. And there's tutorials out there to do that. But for this, I'm just going to be very basic in Substance and just kind of go through just the baking process. So one thing we want is compute tangent space per fragment. You want that selected. Document resolution, this here doesn't matter because this changes on the fly. This is not a constant. It's dynamic, so this is just what you're going to display in your viewport here real time. You can actually keep this at 1K and then bake out your maps at 4K, and your maps are still essentially at 4K. So it's all So it doesn't matter. What you export is what you're going to export, and that's what does matter. So anyway, all right, we're going to select our object, and we're going to go to screwdriver here. So we have our low poly mesh now. We're going to hit OK. It's going to load it up. Quick load. Nice, good to go. And then I always hit F to just zoom everything in. The UV always comes in at a weird spot. So actually, I don't know why. I don't know why that, oh, I'm sorry. I totally imported the wrong one. That's my bad. I've done, like I said, I've done this in the past, so I totally went into the file I was actually making a project for and imported that. So my bad, wasting your time, looking foolish. So we're gonna discard that. We're gonna start over. There we go. I could tell because I initially modeled that that pinpoint head in, and now I want to bake that in. I should have baked it to begin with, but I guess I don't know the results either. We'll see how the results turn out. So here's our low poly mesh anyway. We're good to go. So I'm not gonna dink around here and waste your time. Like again, here's now where that document resolution was at the beginning of our project, and you can change that on the fly. So I always like my GPU is good enough so I can work in 4K. So Substance Painter is so GPU heavy, and it's hard to recommend anyone working on it if you don't have a capable GPU, because painting in Substance and lagging like crazy, you're just gonna want to throw your computer out the window. So I recommend getting a capable GPU. So alright, so what we're going to do is here, we're going to go to our texture set settings, and we're going to go to bake mesh maps. So the first thing we want to do is we want to, unless you definitely know your output size will not exceed X amount, if you're going to bake, 1K or 512, if you know you're going to be low and you have no reason to take the time to bake 4K, don't. But I don't know, I always bake in 4K. It really doesn't take that long anyway. 8K is overkill, but 4K, you can always scale down. You'd hate to bake at 1K and realize, oh, I'm going to export at 2K or 4K and, have to go back and bake your maps. You just might as well start high, work low. It's really not that big of a deal. Dilation width, I'm not too sure of what that exactly entails. I just kind of leave it at default. Usually never have any issues with it. Here we're going to, right here, this little icon here, we're going to nab this guy, and this is where we're going to load our high polys in. So we're going to control select all that stuff. We're going to open that. Now it just loaded all the high polys in that we're going to use to bake into the low poly. Here is our cage. So usually the default is good, but if you got stuff like really sticking out, which is what we might need for, say, the screw, we're going to increase that, which I think for this sake I'm going to do, because I don't have any kind of objects outside of the screw that might show into the bake. It's very isolated. It's a very simple model, so I could actually increase this to, let's say, just 0.25, and just so I can make sure I get all that text in and all that jazz. That might be a little overkill, but usually the default is fine. But I think for this case, we're just going to bump it up. Now this is where things are crucial here. So right here, as far as match, you want to go by mesh name, and that's going to correspond with how we prepped our model. So we did things very name dependent. So we want to go, and we want to bake name dependent. So we definitely want to go by mesh name. And anti-aliasing, 4x4 is usually good. You're going to get great results, and you're not going to get that extra chug with the 8x8. 8x8 and 4x4 are very similar. You're not going to get too much of a difference. So 4x4 is pretty good to go. Now this is again where our suffixes come into play. And if you remember in Max, what we did, we went underscore capital high poly and underscore capital low poly. So again, that's crucial too. You want to make sure you get that right, and that was the suffixes we used on the low poly and the high poly. So that's very important. World space normal, we don't do anything there. ID, now this is where we go and we made our material ID. So right now it's saying it's going to find it from vertex color, which we don't have. What we have is we have a mesh ID, or if you use ZBrush Polygroup, they now combine that into one. So that works perfect. So ours is a material ID, and we can just select that, and it's going to go off those material IDs we set up in Max. So now we go to ambient occlusion, and you usually don't want to mess with that. It usually gives a good AO, but you could mess with these numbers if you wanted a stronger AO and have things a little more shaded, and that's just something to play with and figure out on your own. But the main thing here is, again, go back to always and put it to only use same mesh name. Curvature, don't really touch curvature. Position, don't really touch position either. It's usually what it needs to be. So the defaults are there. But again, we go back to thickness, and same thing as ambient occlusion. We change it from always to only same mesh name. And that's it, folks. We're all prepped up. We're ready to bake this bad boy. Again, make sure, I always like to start at 4K. You can bump down, you can export down, but you know, once your maps are baked, they're baked. You'd have to rebake them if you needed to go up. So I always like to start at 4K, and you know, like I said, you can always save down, so you don't lose work, lose time. So, all right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bake these maps. I'm not going to make you wait and watch me do it. That would just be boring, right? So I'm going to bake these maps and come back to you guys, and we'll see what our results look like. So, see you in a few. All right, guys, we are back, and I am ecstatic, absolutely ecstatic. We had a great result. Really happy with how everything turned out, and it baked out really nice. And I was also surprised too how well this point baked out. I wasn't sure how that was going to turn out, but yeah, it baked out really nice. And so thinking about that, I looked at my handle and I was like, you know what? I might have not needed to model all that handling. I mean, I still baked it with the high poly, and you can see as I get up in here, you can see that the high poly kind of gives it a nice roundness. It gives it a nice shade. You know, once you paint that in and fill it in, it'll look a lot better. And that's the key with some of the stuff. Like, you won't, like in the handle itself, you're like, oh well, it's, you know, the point of baking. But actually, what's cool is you get nice shadows. You get a nice shade when you add extra edges and subdivide it. You get a nice kind of shade here. If I can bring this down, there you go. You get a nice shade, good shadow on your edges here. So you'll see kind of that stuff being smooth rather than this blah hard edge. That's just not realistic. So yeah, like I said, I'm pretty jacked how that turned out and how everything baked. The screw actually even baked pretty well. Like I said, normally I would probably model that. That's, like, if you look at it from the side, it's very blah, but I don't know, man, it kind of works. You know, it kind of works too. So you just have to paint that metal material in, and that worked out pretty well. The text, like I said, the text baked out nice. This might have been a little too big. See, it's got a pretty strong shadow, so it looks a little extra deep, I guess. But the other text on this side, I baked out real nice, and overall I'm pleased. Like I said, I might have, seeing how the point turned out, I probably could have modeled this handle completely filled up, a low poly, and then actually bake these big indents. But indents that big on the handle that's kind of hard to get away with. So it wasn't that big of a deal to commit a little bit of triangles to just modeling in that handle. It really wasn't that heavy anyway. So it's always hard to find that balance of, okay, what can I bake in, you know, and what can I optimize, or like what can I optimize through bakes, or what do I have to model in? You know, it's a rope walk. It really is. So I don't know. Overall, this turned out really good. Had a great bake, and again, and also I'm viewing this in 1K, so we could bump this up into 4K, and we'll get a better result. I should have had that set for you, but it didn't even take any time to lag. We're working on a nice low model. So, all right, yeah, so you can get in there and you can actually see that things are a lot cleaner. So that's cool. Yeah, actually turned out pretty well. I'm happy with the result. These edges, these things are sharper, and you can see actually where that bake is. You can see that bake, that shadows right there, and the actual polygon is this line. So you really wouldn't see that. You would just kind of see the good shading from the bake, and could be a little bit better, but for the tutorial, hey man, it worked fine. So all right, that's good to go. Our bake's totally good, and I'll show you again. This is where the material wound up. So remember with the shader we applied in 3ds Max, that's that same shader here. Now if we used multiple shaders, they would be here. You know, you'd have like a 1 and a 2, and that would show up in your UVW. So if whatever we applied, say one shader to the certain geometry, that geometry would show up in this UV, and then we'd have a separate UV. So it's a good way to break things up. But if you want everything on one UV map, just definitely use one shader. You'll be racking. So real quick, let's just go through and show you what the material IDs did, and we'll just rock a couple quick materials here. Go plastic glossy, and let's do a steel rough. The plastic glossy is a little too glossy for my taste, so we're gonna bump that down. Let's add a roughness of 0.2. So all right, now this is where the material IDs come into play if you're completely new to Substance. So we're gonna add a mask with color selection, and that color selection is now gonna find the material ID we set up. So you can see these IDs, and we actually have 3 of them. I don't know why we have 3 of them, but that's really not an issue. The good thing, it's actually better because we have it more separated. Actually, the more separated you can get your material IDs, the better or the easier it is to work with your texture. So it's not a bad thing. But our metal is the blue, so we're going to select the blue. Now you can see that stuff separated off. So I got a little metal texture on the hand or on the point there, and then we have our plastic on the handle. And then what you could do too here is you can see, unfortunately, some of that green's coming through. So I don't know why that is, but on that plastic, I don't know. I don't know where that. I honestly have no idea where that green's coming in. Interesting, but not a huge issue. Anyway, in the lights. Oh, it's in the light. It's in the HDRI. All right, we're straight, man. We're straight. All is good. All is good. What we're gonna do is here, obviously, since we baked that separate object into this end piece, we couldn't break that material ID up. I guess you could do it maybe in a poly group. Actually, no, you couldn't, because you'd have to have those polygons there, and we didn't have that in the low poly. And you wouldn't want to do that anyway. You don't want to commit polygons for something like that when you can just hand paint it in. So what we'll do here is we're going to right click, and we're going to add paint. And I'm going to switch from tangent space to UV, and we're going to go 100% here, and we're just going to paint that in real quick. I'm not gonna waste your guys' time. The main point of this was just to focus on the bake, but yeah, I just wanna go through and show you this real quick. So we're just gonna paint that bad boy in and get a little metal nut. Doesn't it look cool, man? It looks so dope. The coolest metal nut you'll ever see. See one over that, but that's fine, man. I'm just trying to do this quick. Alright, that's good. That's good. We're going to move on. I'm not going to waste your time. Alright, so, yeah, pretty cool. And then what you could do here is, I did this earlier. I used it for a project. So you can duplicate that layer. We'll add a mask, and we're going to add a paint layer. And this was kind of tedious. There could be an easier way to do it. You could set up poly groups, but I didn't want to do that because if I set up poly groups on the low poly, if I went a little deeper into it, it would still select here, and I would still have to paint that in by hand, the high poly bake. So it's not that big of a deal. Either way, I think you're going to be forced to hand paint that in. So what you could do then is change your color up, get yourself a nice green, I suppose, and we'll go back to the paint here, and then yeah, you just paint that into the handle, get your get your separated colors going and bring that stuff to life. So kind of cool, right? And that's, yeah, we'll end it right there, man. That's the baking process. Very cool stuff. Like I said, I really like using Substance. It's very straightforward, and I've always gotten great results. Algorithmic does an awesome job. This is amazing software, and it's really changed the game in the industry in a way I haven't seen in a very long time. So I hope this helped you guys out. I tried to make it a little bit faster than I hope it turned out. The whole thing turned out to be about a half hour. So, but there's a lot of good stuff in here. I like to explain things a little bit more thoroughly rather than just have you guys follow button clicks, because yeah, you can follow button clicks and get your result, but you're not really going to learn as much. So it's good to dive into theory, understand what things are doing, so that really burns into the brain, and you just, again, you're not just going from A to Z without understanding how things work. It's good to know how things work. It helps you in the future, helps you with other stuff. It continues to add to your growth. So, all right, once again, guys, thanks for stopping by and watching. If you have any tutorials or videos you'd like to see in the future, stop on by, leave a comment, let me know, and I'll bust that stuff out for you. I'm not a master by any means. There's a lot of great guys out there who provide information. I'm just trying to get some out there myself. I enjoy doing this. So in the future here, I'd like to provide some unwrap and texture tutorials, mainly focusing on 3ds Max and programs such as Roadkill for making seams. And I'm going to get that out there soon. So once again, thanks for stopping by, and hit a subscribe, and I hope you had fun. I had fun teaching. All right, take care.